Welcome to another episode of the CarryTrainer Higher Line podcast. Welcome to yet another episode of the Higher Line podcast. We've got a dude that came all the way from sunny Phoenix, Arizona, Mr. Dave Turley. Dave's a friend, a student. I'm a student of his. We're going to talk a little bit about his time as a sheriff's deputy and a United States Marshal. So today's podcast is with Dave Turley, a hunter of men. That could be like a perverted thing or like a tactical thing.
Like we always
So
get
what
our
do you
man.
do? And you're like, I'm a man hunter.
Yeah. And we always get our man. There you go.
Yeah. Welcome.
Thank you.
How many days did it take you to drive all the way here to Chicago?
Today is day 4. It's kind of a blur.
Yeah.
It's kind of a blur.
What did you see on the way that was cool?
Well, let's see. Yesterday we stopped by Hannibal and Mark Twain's place where he grew up. We today went to Woodstock, which was kind of cool. Town Square. So it's been kind of a blur. We started out in Arizona. We hit the Four Corners.
Very cool.
Pretty amazing.
Did you go through the canyon in Texas that we talked about, Palo Duro, the canyon?
No, that'll be probably on the way home.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah. So tell the folks listening a little bit about yourself. You're a lifer cop.
Yeah,
retired.
30 years. So let's see. I got into...
And now you own a training company with your wife, TaxSafe.
Yep, TaxSafe AZ. We're out in Arizona in the West Valley, West Phoenix metro area. And we specialize in the fundamentals. So I do concealed carry classes. We do a lot of training for families and custom tailored training. We'll come to your home and teach security and awareness consulting. We do some consulting with local schools and churches. And then a lot of our clients, our youngest client was an 11-year-old girl, and our oldest client was an 82-year-old grandmother. So that kind of gives you an idea. So we like to help keep people safe. So I'm trying to leverage what I was provided by the taxpayers during my career and give that knowledge out, share that, and help people keep their families safe.
What's a US Marshal's main job?
Well, let's see. When I started, I worked for a small city police department. I started when I was about 22. And I started out on patrol. I got my way up into investigations. So I worked homicide, sex crimes, crimes against children, gang enforcement, organized crime. And then so back in the mid-90s, I went to the department where I retired from, which was a larger department sort of in the Metro Phoenix area. It's a suburb just outside of Phoenix. We were about 500 sworn. So I had to start over for a few years there. So I worked graveyard shift patrol. I was still fairly young. And because of my earlier time at this earlier department, I had some SWAT training. We stood up our first SWAT team out there. I eventually became the sergeant of that SWAT unit. So when I went to the next agency, they were aware of that. And after I did about 3 years on patrol, they asked me to come in and be a firearms instructor. So I joined the firearms training program, but that's kind of a collateral duty for us. So I still work.
Still had to go do your day job or night job.
Yeah. Exactly. Night job in my case. I stayed on graves for about 5 years. I liked it.
Because of the action at night, because there was stuff to do, or you just liked the...
Honestly, yeah. It was cops and robbers.
Yeah, that's when the ghouls come out, right?
Exactly. Things are very simple.
Good people are sleeping, bad people are.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
And so if someone's out and about, they're fair game to stop and talk to them, right? And even they know that. So
please do add to that a little bit, because there's going to be people that are listening that are going to be like, effing cop, like what? Somebody's just, maybe they're working night shift too, trying to go home to their family, and you're just harassing them, because you are that kind of cop. You are the harasser, dude.
I was lucky because once I started getting into some specialized units, I got away from that. So I used to joke, some of my buddies wouldn't agree with this, but I joked that last 10 or 15 years we had no cop skills left whatsoever. We're not the kind of guys you would call to do a DUI. We couldn't do a traffic investigation. We were more pull up in the van, jump them and bring them in to attend court. That was our bag. But yeah, going back to graveyards, that was a lot of fun because that was the late 90s, and still the mark of a good street cop was they wanted you to be aggressive and be proactive. And people would understand. So if you have a nice neighborhood and someone's coming or going at 2 a.m., for example, you wouldn't get a lot of flack if you stopped them and just politely ask, hey, what's going on? Where you headed? They would actually thank you for doing your job.
Different world now.
Different world. And I get that a lot. That was before the body-worn cameras. So officers nowadays think a lot different. They've been brought up in a whole different culture than what we had. And that's not a bad thing. It's good that law enforcement keeps evolving. Accountability is always good, but they're kind of encouraged now not to be so aggressive.
Everything changes too, right? Everything changes.
Yeah.
Not just...
So I did the firearms instruction. I stayed on patrol for a few years, and then there was an opening in the gang enforcement unit. So at that department, it was a full-time job, and that's what I wanted to do, is something active, chasing bad guys. So I went into that unit, and that's where things started to get very interesting because we had a lot of, our specialty was organized street crime and street gangs, criminal street gangs. A lot of suppression, tactical enforcement. That was a lot of fun. So received a lot of good training there. Continued to work as a firearms instructor for graveyard shift. And then eventually the gang enforcement unit started to be called on to go hunt people down. So they'd say, for example, a homicide detective is in an interview and somebody would mention a street name. Let's say, well, I know Spider. And I'll apologize to anybody out there that goes by Spider. But they'd say, hey, Spider was there. He's a shooter or whatever. So the homicide dicks would turn to us and say, go find out who Spider is and pick him up.
And dicks means detectives in his world.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, or the CarryTrainer, if I'm in a CarryTrainer class.
Dicks.
Yeah. So we learned that that constant contact and being out of the office and working the street, that became important to the investigators to identify these people and who they associated with.
You had a body of knowledge on who was out and about and what they were doing. It wasn't just going blindly looking for people you had no knowledge of.
Right, and sometimes you can imagine that would make a difference if you have a homicide with no leads, zero information, that's dead in the water. So what we were able to lend to that was a network of informants, knowledge of the street, because unlike other detectives that kind of worked a desk, we were out in the street every night. So we would say, well, this person's cousin lives here, let's talk to so-and-so, and we would be counted on to provide that intelligence. And we also ran the intelligence files that we would, compile names and data banks of who associates with who as it pertains to street gangs. So after a couple of years of that, the department realized this is actually a valuable resource. So they created the first full-time fugitive unit. And that's where we were basically paid to hunt fugitives. Fugitives in the sense that they have arrest warrants or they're wanted from another jurisdiction for some type of a violent crime. Anybody that was armed, anybody that was wanted for a violent offense, those are the ones that we were specialized to bring in. And that was really great. But as you can imagine, that's like far removed from conventional law enforcement.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And eventually you ended up with the Marshals.
So that went on for several years. We had quite a team. The same team is still in place. We had about 12 years where no one promoted because they didn't want to.
They wanted to stay doing their gig.
Yeah, no one transferred out. They were all considered subject matter experts. So we had the same team of about 8 detectives that worked together day in and day out. And it was very much a lifestyle. So that was...
You're not looking for people that blew off traffic court or a parking ticket. These are bad people.
Violent offenders only.
Yeah.
So for example, a typical request would be for detectives that are investigating a shooting, and they'd say, we need this guy picked up, we need his car, because we believe that car was involved, and supposedly a black semi-automatic handgun. So that was the order. They needed a pepperoni, large, with double crust, and so we would be expected to pick a time when he was in his red car with his black semi-automatic, and we would have to bring him in safely, which we got very good at, and that's what we're very proud of, is the fact that later when I joined the Marshal Service, those numbers on the task force, we would do about 1,200 cases a year of violent felons. And these are all people that were some sort of weapons-related offense. And
So most or all of the people that you were going to interdict with were armed or presumed armed.
absolutely, or at the very least, they'd committed some sort of violent offense.
So they were capable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which helped us a lot with our mindset. So we had a luxury of, we always hunted in a pack, and we always picked the time and the place of the engagement. So it's the opposite of what a young patrol officer would deal with,
Sure.
where they have to come to your door with a smile and provide customer service. We were just the opposite of that. We would follow you, and sort of the mindset we operated off of is we'd follow you days or weeks for that 30-second window when you're vulnerable.
Predators.
Exactly. But a predator that was mature and disciplined, we learned early on not to engage unless all the conditions are on our side. It was always a win, never anything even debatable.
So you might be chasing somebody for weeks and have an opportunity, but would have to look at it and say, okay, this could go south because of this or that. Not worth it. Will hold.
Exactly. And
Not let your emotions, because you probably geeked up, like, let's do it. We finally got an opportunity.
Yeah, that's always a factor. So I like when you talk about controlling your emotional state, that's very much a quest for all of us. Because in my job, that being rational and applying common sense, that's the only thing that would really save you. Society doesn't want a fugitive unit to be involved in 20 shootings a year. Society is not willing to accept that, regardless of the reason. So common sense has to prevail. And in our job, we had that one assignment where we were able to plan our hits. We planned all of our ops. And if there was a moment where we weren't totally in control, we would abort. So for example, if I'm watching you and I see you walking out to teach a class and you've got a bag of handguns and your AR, then we're not going to engage.
You're waiting until I've got my Speedos and roller skates on, taking
Probably not the Speedos so much. Yeah, if you're oiled up, no. You got to take into account friction. No.
Yes, won't be able to grab on.
But if you have your arms loaded with groceries and you maybe have your wife with you and you're not in a posture where you'll fight, whatever it takes to bring that person in safely, that was kind of our hallmark, and the team still does that. But after working in the fugitive squad for quite a few years, our department decided, our chain of command decided they were going to join the US Marshals service in a long-term arrangement to create this violent offender task force. And at the time, no one wanted to go. And our boss called us all in, and he didn't want to send anyone. So he's like, well, Mick, who should I send? Who's going to go? And you'd say, well, send me. Let the others stay here, send me. Every person on the team told the boss that. So it was getting awkward for him. He knew that he was being pushed by the chief to send someone to this assignment. No one wanted to go. But I had done a couple of contract jobs in different countries down in the Caribbean, did a gig in the Philippines. So I sort of knew that there was something else out there, and I was ready. I thought I was the one person on the crew that was probably easily adaptable to that. So I went in one day and told my boss, I'll take that assignment. I'll go to the task force. So then I went over to the other side and got credentialed as U.S. Deputy, Special Deputy U.S. Marshal. A few years later, our entire team followed me. So then it became sort of a I don't know what you'd want to call it like an all-star team, but you had fugitive detectives from every organization. So probation, parole, state police, county, several local PDs, and then you had a couple of full-time deputy US Marshals. And so we worked under the command of a supervisory US Marshal. And that's where life kind of changed for us a little bit. That was a good gig.
Very cool.
Yeah.
You guys would go out, collect these bad guys. What are some lessons that you learned that you are now passing on to the people that are paying you to come train?
The biggest things I always harp on is a lot of times the fundamentals. So avoidance, I could never say enough about living that avoidance lifestyle, practicing the color codes of awareness, regardless of who you are. 99% of things I think can be avoided if you're just a little bit heads up. You don't have to live in a hypervigilant state, but you just should be minimally aware. The best fight, obviously, is not to fight. And I lived that. That was very important to us. We would overwhelm someone so aggressively, it actually reduces risk, if that makes sense.
Sure.
I know that might be hard to believe for people, but when we would hit a door or bail out of a vehicle on surveillance, 4 or 5 guys with beards and assault rifles, and we would, almost everyone of a violent nature would be grounded. In other words, we'd put them on the ground immediately. It's not a type of a thing where you walk up and introduce yourself and ask for cooperation. We would bail out, fully kitted up, and our primary weapons were an AR and then our Glocks. So we always had designated less lethal and several different platforms.
Meaning you had shooters with the less lethal, or people that were designated that you're the guy that's going to use the beanbag round, or you're the guy with the taser.
Exactly, yeah. So we'd have designated hands-on, because sometimes you don't even want the situation of having to come back to the holster. We learned that if we're going to do that, it's important to have a guy who's hands-on immediately. In other words, with combative skills to subdue that person and control their arms immediately. Because if we know they're armed in a waistband or an appendix carry at the time that we arrest them, that's what the case agents are ordering. So we still have to fulfill that, but we do it safely. So it's overwhelming. And we always used surprise, and that led to that overly aggressive posture in the initial seconds. 99 times out of 100, that diffused any fight. The last couple of lethal incidents we had was where the bad guy was able to shoot at us first. And so we were always kind of proud of the fact that nobody was engaged in a lethal form unless they delivered that force on us, and then we responded. That worked out well for us 99 times out of 10. With those, that was a high operational tempo. So the worst we ever had in a year would be 1 or 2 guys maybe got a little boo-boo from the pavement, or 1 guy maybe got tased, or a bruise from an impact round. Other than that, they weren't, because these people have to be turned over for an interview, and they have to be in a frame of mind where they're willing to sit down and talk to a detective. But to your question about things I would pass on to people, avoidance, deflection, certainly, and it's something that we as trainers in this community, we talk about this a lot. None of us are perfect. You know, I'm a red-blooded man as well. I'm prone to that flash of temper if the person in front of me is locking up their brakes, or, you know, we always have those situations, but it's imperative to keep those emotions under control.
What do you mean by deflection? What is that?
Trying to avoid a situation. You could also say avoidance, but de-escalation, deflection. So sometimes a simple random encounter that might lead to a fist fight, you can diffuse those by the most random things. You're looking for some place, or, you know, you come up with some type of a line to diffuse a situation. It's sort of a verbal OODA loop. If you're upset and you're confronting me, and then I come up with some sort of random behavior just to throw you off, anything to get you to chuckle, to get you distracted, or maybe you think that I'm not worth the time, whatever it takes to sort of deflect that threat away in a non-violent manner. The other thing I learned about quite a bit that we would share with people is we learned there's two basic tactics in life. You want to take away a person's will to fight or a person's ability to fight. And if you think about it in those two terms, that's a pretty effective mindset to have. So the Hollywood bank robbery that we all grew up watching, on TV, look at the first guy. By first guy, I mean the one that was behind the truck firing at the SWAT operators when they arrived. Do you remember that scene? So I asked people.
Was that Heat? The movie was made about that? Was that Heat?
I don't remember which came first, probably.
Val Kilmer and...
Yeah, that infamous shootout scene. Remember, he'd hit his bolt release on his AR?
Yeah.
Big bag of cash. So if you think about that first guy that was behind the truck firing at the officers, would you say they took away his will to fight or his ability?
I don't remember that scene.
He was the one that was, the SWAT cops were in the marked unit. They were in shorts. They'd been at the range training. And as they're rolling up, he's firing from behind a pickup. That was the infamous where the SWAT officer fired prone under the car.
Skipped the rounds. Yeah.
So that guy fought until he was incapacitated, right? So they had to physically take away his ability to fight. They had to defeat him physically with fire. But the other guy that was walking through the neighborhood when they got separated, and he had gone through all of his long guns, I guess, and you could see detectives, sort of plainclothes guys, were peppering him with their Berettas and whatnot. You could see rounds were impacting him, but he wasn't hurt. And he looked around, and at one point I think he had a malfunction with one handgun, and he just killed himself. So they clearly took away his will to fight. He was the one that decided when he was done, right? They didn't overwhelm him. So he made a choice. So those are two components I used to look at. Can we take away his ability to fight? Is it easier to do that? Or is it easier to take away his will to fight? That's kind of a good angle to think of.
The challenge is nobody controls my will. Nobody controls your will. So that's the...
Right.
Yeah, that's a course of action that you have some control over, but little.
Right. That's a good point, too. So you're coming up, we would come up to the front door of a house, which we did every day, sometimes 2 or 3 hits before lunch, maybe 1 or 2 after.
Wow.
But here's the thing that we learned, is when I knock at that door or kick the door in or whatever I do, I'm notifying you that we're here. We're telling you who we are because of knock and announce, But let's be honest, we're relying on your willingness to surrender to our authority. That you're basically submitting to arrest. Even though it's very dramatic fashion, we've got guys bailing out of vehicles, it's all up to you, your reaction to that knock on the door or that breach of a door. So I hope that patrol officers, deputies, detectives would keep that in mind. Anytime you go up to a door, you're submitting to that person's will. You're allowing them to have a choice. So how many times have we known people to get shot through a door?
Sure, I know several.
Yeah, so we've learned to not even allow that scenario to take place. We developed tactics where we had some standoff capability so we could verbally address them and allow them to come out and come to us. It's just not worth it. You can't sustain those losses, right? That's a human being and a family and a career. So those are some of the things that we were able to put into action. And ironically too, I was talking to Z, and he was talking about how the special units in the military, they adopted a lot of those same tactics. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, the idea of through the door at all costs, kind of like, well, wait a sec, what's at stake here? There's not a kid with a knife to his head behind every door.
Right.
But that became the predominant training for a long time. Like, go kick the door down and see what's in there. Well, wait a minute here.
Yeah, and so nowadays it's someone in the group has to stop and say, hey, real quick, what are we doing here? And why, question with boldness, why is the plan call for this? So we would, 9 times out of 10, if you just let things play out in a calm manner, plus we would try to avoid ever being in the situation where we're taking the escalation action. If the bad guy escalates,
because it doesn't support the mission, which is get this guy in front of a judge or into a interview room.
So we had to learn early on. We would have briefings, and sometimes we would hear a guy, Bone Crusher. He's got an aggressive nickname, and he's been to prison many times, or he's known to be a violent guy. Okay, it's good to know that, but we reached a point where we learned, I'm sitting here in the briefing room. I'm here for a reason. So I already know the guy is violent. So we would never underestimate any foe, but at the same time, we would encourage the detectives, the people that are giving us the case, you don't have to sell us. Matter of fact, I don't even really need to know. I don't need to know his emotional state because I assume it's bad. I don't need to know his history because I assume he'll shoot at me if I lower my guard. So,
Right, we're not here picking up a jaywalker.
Yeah, but they could also have you so hyped up over a guy that it's not, you come out, you're so assed up, you can't conduct a contact because he's going to wipe out our whole team or whatnot.
You're not thinking clearly.
Yeah.
You had an incident, you talked about at one of our classes where one of your team was shot. And your medical training came into play, but there was a bunch of stuff which I think's valuable for the audience. You had the training, you had gear, and people, I'll predicate the conversation on this. I think the general public oftentimes misinterprets or misunderstands the capability of law enforcement, misunderstands like what the government has at its disposal. For example, like most street cops are not ER doctors. Maybe they know some CPR and like traumatic bleeding control, maybe. And that's if they're even there to help you. And so I think people assume, not so much in our community, but many people assume like every cop's a world-class marksman, and there's just some things that are not. So tell a little bit of that story.
Okay, so I'll try to be a little careful for names and places or what have you.
Nobody needs to know any of that business.
But this is a good vignette into the life of like a fugitive person. So started off in the morning, I'm getting my morning coffee, and I get a call from my boss, and he says that we're in the metro area and we're watching one of these storage places. And if I go into too much detail, go ahead and feel free to stop me, but
tell the story. I think that story's good because when folks hear it, they're going to appreciate all the nuances.
Okay. So we had known through technology, we've been doing some technological surveillance. That's all I can say about that. But we knew that this guy, over the weekend, this was a Monday morning, over the weekend, he had been staying in a storage locker. And it was one of these interior places where you open the warehouse door and there's a long row of like 40 doors, small 8x12 rooms or whatnot. So my boss said, we're calling the whole team in, come to this certain area of town. So I go to this area, and we had a wide perimeter established with the US Marshals, people from the task force. And what we called our customer was a street crimes sergeant, good friend of mine. And his unit had the case on this suspect. So we would call them the customers. And as a courtesy, we brought him with us. Normally when that happens, there's a handover of the case, and we say, okay, we have this, we'll call you when I used to say, I'll call you when your package is ready. Whether that might be a couple hours or a couple of days. So he was out helping us out on surveillance. So my boss asked me to go into this storage yard and mix something up. The guy was dug in. We didn't have an exact location. So one of my things I did was undercover work as far as ruses and things. So I took another partner of mine and we went in posing as maintenance workers for this storage locker place. And I came up with a little angle that I had to go inside with a clipboard and note all of the lockers that were unsecured because Barbara in the front office needed the information. That lets me go inside and look around, hopefully without escalating him or alerting him, and hopefully avoiding, a bad confrontation. The guy was known to be extremely dangerous. So we went in and it ended up working out pretty well. We went to several of these lockers, and I was able to look around with my assistant. We got out, and I left the yard. No sooner did I radio my sergeant and tell him, hey, I'm back up. There's actually people living in there that we found. Quite a little survival angle. I'd see people that were actually living in those little 6x8 units.
So you found a bunch of them with people living in.
We did, and you can imagine when I open that door, I see the lock is gone, and I'm trying to stay in character as, you know, Bob the maintenance guy.
Oh, I didn't know you were in here.
So I lift the door, and sure enough, there's a person. This is where your body language comes into play, because you don't want to be doing cop-like things. So I find people living in there. I saw a young girl actually squatted on the floor putting on her makeup like she's in her bedroom going to work, you know, getting ready for her day, but she's in a bare, empty storage locker. So mission accomplished. We scared him up, and a few minutes later, one of the deputy marshals was on perimeter, and the side wall was about 10 feet high with concertina wire. And learn to never underestimate people. Yeah, he probably had a truck or a van on the inside backed up. You know how people store RVs and whatnot. But he came bolting over the fence. But he looked up, and he was obviously switched on, and he saw a vehicle with dark windows with it running. So even though there was a lone female in that truck, he didn't wait around. So he dropped back behind the wall. So we put out information to all the perimeter units. Well, as I got back in my truck, we put our kit back on, my partner and I, and he comes running out the front gate, and he's taken off. He's very panicked. So in that situation, normally we would follow him in our undercover vans or whatnot, but we would let him sort of tire himself out. The best time to engage you is when you're exhausted.
Sure.
You've been training for 2 hours, not when you're fresh, you know, stretching out, ready to go.
Right.
So we were going to let him sort of run himself out. He had juked into a couple of businesses. He was obviously panicked, and he couldn't find anywhere to go. He knew if he grounded himself, we'd have him. We would evacuate whatever place, and we'd go in and get him. So he was in front of an auto parts store, and the sergeant pulled up in an undercover vehicle and confronted him. But the sergeant was dressed pretty much like you are. And so the guy was walking, and he figured, well, things have de-escalated. The sergeant confronted him, and he never broke stride. He just kept walking, but he glanced over at the sergeant, and he just pulled a concealed, I think it was a little high point 9, and shot him single time in the chest. It was directly in the center. Sergeant went down. My squad mates and I rounded the corner, and now we're hearing the shot. And as we rolled up, the guy was running into the front of the store. He took cover behind a large concrete column, and my teammate opened up with his short-barreled rifle. This sounds pretty dark, so I apologize, but he opened up through his windshield as he's approaching, trying to put rounds on the guy. The guy didn't engage us. He ran into the auto parts store. So at that point, we see a person down, and I think it's a civilian. There's no body armor, no kit. And we're processing. I pull right up to him with my truck. We're processing whether to lock the front down or, you know, when are we going to get someone to the back of the store? Because again, we've got him, we think, grounded. And then somebody puts out information that this is one of ours. And I look down, and only then did I see his face. And it didn't seem right because he wasn't wearing any police gear because he was in surveillance mode. Mm-hmm. But I saw his face, and even though he was very ashen, you hear that word? Well, I learned what that means. But that's our guy. So then we decide to jump out. We cover down. I asked my partner, take a knee in front of us with your rifle. And my teammate and I went hands-on with him, and he grabbed his aid kit. The rest of the guys, we told them, get to the back of the store. So we broke out a couple of the city department issued chest seals that they'd given out the year before in our kit bags.
And this guy that was shot wasn't just somebody that was a policeman. He was a personal friend of yours, right? He's a guy you know well.
Yeah, and my boss, it's a funny moment, is my boss was standing over us a few feet away from me to Drew, and my boss had surgery, and so he couldn't use his arm. He took out the sling. Boss, I'm sorry, but this is years ago. He took off the sling to be out there with his troops, so he couldn't use that arm. So I remember looking up, and this fog of war type moment, my boss went to the academy with him That's how tight they were. And he said, you know, Dave, I can't help you right now. And I didn't understand it. I couldn't process the data coming in. And I thought, does that mean because you're too close to him? Or he meant literally like, I can't help you because I can't use my arm. So we're just, okay, we worked. My partner got out his city issued chest seals. So the city had gone to the trouble to give us aid kits, what we call in this business now IFAKs, individual first aid kits. So my partner felt horrible. He got his chest seals out and they crumbled. They just fell apart from the Arizona sun. So I had asked Mrs. Turley just the week before to order new chest seals because I geek out on that and I date mine. And, you know, the Marshal Service provided a lot of the hands-on TCCC type training for us. And then with the task force, we were able to get access to a lot of that good TCCC training. So I had just ordered my chest seals, and every one of my vehicles, my IFAK is on the passenger side headrest. So if you have a network of undercovers, you always know, just get to that passenger headrest. So I grabbed the chest seals. I asked my partner to grab the chest seals. He knew where they were. They were brand new. So we're talking to the sergeant that's down while my partner took a knee and covered with his AR. Then we hear shots break out inside the store. And I thought maybe he was active shooter in the auto parts store. What I later learned was he came out, 2 detectives took up a position at the back of the store. He engaged them. So you had a second gun battle that was going on. But it sounded, even though it was pistols, it was incredibly loud.
Interesting.
And yeah, it was incredibly loud. They sounded like AKs. And that was even behind the store. So we're working on our sergeant, and the first thing he's talking, his mindset was incredible, but he says, I've dropped a lung, in his words. So we're looking for a bullet hole, can't find one. My partner cuts away the clothing. So the shears, obviously a big deal. Never assume anything. So we were doing, our trainers trained us to make cat claws with our hands, and we were going, and sure enough, we find a hole, and we try not to react because it looked like it was where his heart would be. So we're looking over and he's down. So we turn him over and he's in some distress. He says, I can't breathe. We can clearly see that he's not doing well. So my partner turns him over, does the cat claws down his back, finds the exit wound way down below his left side, below his belt. So it transited his entire chest.
The 9mm went in here, came out down here.
Exactly. One 9mm FMJ from 10 feet out of a high point of all things. So
when he found that, didn't something happen?
When he found
the bullet hole, the exit.
Yeah, so he finds that, and the first thing we do is apply a chest seal to the front. I think we had hyphens at that time, but we applied, those were halos, first generation that I had bought my own self. So we put chest seal on the front, we cleaned the back, used some C-locks and some combat gauze. And as soon as we did that, he said, I can feel a difference. And he's later told us that I felt like I was drowning, suffocating, and then immediately I felt relief when we put that on. I was talking to him routinely, and my boss told me later, who was standing over us, that I guess I actually held his eyes open and I slapped him at one point.
You don't remember doing that?
Not to that detail, I don't. But I was telling him all those years in the gym, we were just trying to find motivation. You know, all those years in the gym, he was in great shape. And we talked about that, you know, this is where that comes into play, your fitness, you know, stay with us. And I guess at one point he went out, and that's when I peeled his eye open and poked him and slapped him. But we had to find out where his wife was, because she was one of our coppers. And she was at an appointment, but he was able to tell me she's at a doctor's appointment. He was more afraid of her, what she was going to do to him, because he didn't have armor on. That was a no-no. He shouldn't have got out. But so we had to get on the radio and discreetly say, hey, find her, send someone to bring her here. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because we don't mention names over the radio of who's down or whatever. We just said one of ours. And the detective who worked for this sergeant said, I understand what you're saying. I'll make it happen. So medics show up, and then there's still a gunfight and a search going on for the target, the suspect. The first two paramedics show up, and I remember they were going to do an IV in his leg because the veins were collapsed apparently in his arms, and it made a mark on me because the female paramedic said, I can't get any veins. These veins are collapsed or whatnot. And the male paramedic said, yeah, because he's dying. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm holding him in his grip and keeping him talking, but as soon as we get him stabilized, I'm going to smack the shit out of you, So they arrived and we were able to get him loaded up in an ambo. And then my partner stood up and he had a moment where he had blood on it. He wiped his blood and he said, that's it. I need a minute. And so that was kind of a turning point for him. But I got on the radio and I said, hey, where are we at? We'd split up command. We stayed with our downed officer and my teammates went after the guy. And I said, where are we at? And they said, he may be in a house, get a K9 and come over and we're going to clear the house. So we were back in the fight. We jumped into I had a big Tundra pickup and we threw guys in the back and we were trying to stay one street ahead because he was really fast and moving. He did everything right. He didn't stop too much. Anytime someone would even get near him, he'd shoot at him. So I think he had a situation with a lady. She was in her dining room and he came to her backyard and tried to get her to open the door. She wouldn't, and I think she ran from the door. At that point, there was another shot fired. We don't know if he shot at her or what happened. We'll never know. And then he moved on because he couldn't find a place to bunker down. By this time, enough presence had responded where officers were able to get up one street ahead. So we knew now it's a matter of time, right? We'll have him. Excuse me. So we searched a couple houses with canines. He was already gone because he'd kept moving. He made it about 3 or 4 blocks away until finally we knew that he was in a yard. One of my teammates was able to get back on his technical surveillance and find out he's in this yard. By that time, larger department that was neighboring had a full-time SWAT team with their armored vehicle, their Bearcat. So they rolled up and we held a perimeter at the yard. They penetrated 1 yard, but as they walked through, there's a wooden fence, like where people put their garbage cans on the side of their house. There was some openings in the fence, and the number 4 guy in the stack heard something. They'd already penetrated into the yard. He heard something and he looked over, and the guy was trying to shoot, but the weapon was malfunctioned. And then they ended up using lethal force on him, and he didn't survive that. So that wrapped up that day. I saw the sergeant Saturday night at a retirement party, and he's 100%. It's took him 3 years, but he's back at work.
That was just 3 years ago.
Yeah, March 2nd would have been 18, I guess. 2 years before I retired. But he's even back to work, doing the same job.
Cool.
Yeah.
I bet you after that, every IFAC in every car of everybody you knew was getting opened up and looked at.
Exactly right, Mick. They put a few things started happening with that. Is I noticed, like IFACs, you said this recently, they started becoming very fashionable. Mm-hmm. And I see that a lot. People are spending a lot of money on tourniquets and tourniquet holders.
It's sexy, man.
It is. Yeah, who knew, right? But the city did a department-wide, as well as the Marshal Service, they did a department-wide audit of the tourniquets and the chest seals. That's when we knew that things like that would expire. And I keep my aid bag with me. But yeah, we learned in the Marshal Service had several incidents where, what are we fighting? Even though we're gunfighting, what's out in front of us all the time is our hands and our limbs. So, I always keep one for my right side, one for my left. Some guys could say, well, put one in the middle. You just never know.
Right.
So I'm a little bit obsessed with those, but yeah, we were a product of our training. And matter of fact, one of the medics that trained us was a SWAT medic, and he showed up. he likes to hear that feedback for the training. But when people try to praise us, and my partner, who still, he retired last week actually. He's gone now too, but he would say we're simply a product of our training. We went to the class that they sent us to, and we listened to what our trainers told us. But the things that impacted us a lot were little things like a guy in full kit who just sits down up against the wall and says, "I'm shot, move me out." How are we going to get him out of here? So we learned to pay a lot of attention to vehicles. Where's a medical vehicle, and how are we going to carry them? How are we going to load them?
Yeah, it's easy to talk about, like, hey, if somebody gets shot, you got to carry him out of here. But now, do you know how to pick a 220-pound man up
with full kit? And then weapons? Where do you leave weapons?
Yeah.
Do you leave one on the ground, or what about his long gun? It taught us a lot about checking our gear too, because my teammate that just retired, he had his same little AR platform that he'd carried many times, and he trained with it every week. We shot just about every Friday on that team, but he stood up after our guy was stabilized. He stood up and the weapon just fell off the sling.
One of the mounts broke or something.
Yeah.
I was about to say, I've seen that so much just in training, where guys save $10, they buy a imported connection to the rifle. It's pot metal instead of something that's machined or quality, and it's once every summer at least somebody will be standing talking at one of our rifle classes, and a rifle eats the dirt because the part just breaks.
Standing there.
Yeah, just, because it's been getting abused for 2 or 3 days. Like, and then some piece of shit $10 Amazon QD mount or something just poops out. So
unbelievable. But that can be critical.
And that's just having fun out on a safe range, not where you're going to collect felons.
If you're mobile out in the community, what do you do with a long gun? So there's equipment I learned is very important. Cheap gear is usually the most expensive gear. But the med supplies are very much, those are some good lessons we learned. The doctor had mentioned that that type of wound, because of the different bile issues, kidney,
he was hitting quite a few organs, right?
Yes. So the doctor said, we're having to call in infectious disease people. This was over a 2-year process before he was fully closed. He had a port, I guess, and they hadn't had someone that had survived that, so they didn't know really where to go from there. It was such a catastrophic thing that they were sort of writing the book as they went along. But I'm convinced his fitness and his mindset definitely had a lot to do with it, because he was more afraid of his wife's reaction, and then also he was afraid he'd get a little bit of ridicule for being that guy with no vest.
Yeah.
Because as soon as we know you're going to live, then it's green light.
Sure. Yeah. Where's your vest, pal?
You asked, did something happen after that? What were you?
Didn't you tell me when you first told me the story that one of your fingers plunged into the exit wound?
Yeah, well, the guy checking his back, my other partner, when he was doing, like we call the cat claws sort of, that's how he found it. Because they were so small. The front one was tiny. The back one was a little bit larger, but he knew, and he looked so calmly because he was kind of turned sideways. And he just looked right over his shoulder, and he said his first name. And he goes, "Yeah, you got an exit wound in your lower back." And it was like, that means anything to us. We don't know. If you were a medic, like Saving Private Ryan, the guy would go, "Oh, goodness, my whatever." But we were just like, he's so clinical about it. It was his training. The training, something interesting, the training was actually a little harder than that day, with smoke canisters and flashbangs and sweat. That was a little harder. On that day, we were on autopilot. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. You don't have the luxury of processing unnecessary stuff in that moment.
That's exactly right. Yeah. That's a good way to put it.
Brain just kind of takes you into what's going on right in front of you. And of course, you had all of your other buddies there protecting you, so it wasn't like in that moment. I'm sure you were still paying attention, but you had a guy with a rifle out in front of you, right?
Yeah, and that means a lot when, like that young man, I got him in several hairy situations. He's a young guy, and When I looked at him, though, I said, you take a knee and cover us. The cars were too far. We didn't know if we could move him yet. We were stuck where we were. So the cover was his AR. Mm-hmm. And I said, take a knee and you cover us, okay? And he looked, his eyes were big, and no doubt, he goes, I got it. And he would have stayed right there. They would have had to go through him. Mm-hmm. That's kind of a good feeling.
Yeah. My gun is your shield.
Yeah, we heard.
That's it. That's
Paul?
That actually Dutch Moyer, Army Special Operations from their highest unit. That's kind of his saying. My gun is your shield.
That's cool.
That stuff with gear, I think, is huge. We buy this stuff, and it's expensive, and you're not using it for the most part. And then you've got it, and it sits there, and it becomes out of sight, out of mind until you actually need it. And it's even people's I like to think about that stuff just like the way you maintain your vehicle, or should. I've got friends that are mechanics, and you just talk to a mechanic and ask them like the stories of things that come into the shop that are maintenance related. Mm-hmm. Tires about to blow apart, or brakes that have how are these even working? And people just leave things until they fall apart, rather than people go to the mechanic says your brakes should be replaced. They still work fine. Yeah, for another 6 months or another month until they don't. And that stuff sits there, and you think, it'll be fine. And you can't even open that stuff without it being ready for the garbage. Right. So you say, it's wrapped up, it'll be good. But those types of products, they do have a frickin' shelf life. Yeah,
the consumables. And one thing I've noticed too, this is why we came here for the next training we're doing tomorrow, but the accountability that you guys pursue as far as use your equipment the way you carry it and actually get out here and do it. When have you re-qualified on CPR? Mm-hmm. Those are things people take for granted. Like you might get a guy that takes care of his Craftsman wrenches. He might be able to tell you where every socket that he owns is, but yet his truck is a mess. Mm-hmm. Or he doesn't even know where his guns are.
Yeah.
So that's, I guess, why, like we talked about in the beginning, that's what I enjoy, is trying to share some of that information with people and explain you have the same capabilities. Don't rely just on law enforcement or first responders to come and save you. Have a little bit better of a plan. A lot of this, we can be our own sort of first responders. And like you mentioned, simple things, fire extinguisher, know where your gun is and the condition of your gun. Maybe that 3-second rule. Keep your gun within 3 seconds of you. Or both guns, right?
It's comical how much though we humans get complacent with everything. We drive down the highway and we text and we just take for granted that somebody else is not going to swerve into our lane, or that there's not going to be. I was driving one day and a ladder fell off of a truck at high speed. Hell, the last time a couple times ago, I was in Arizona. I was on the freeway headed to the airport in a rental car, and speeds on the freeways down there. People are going 70, 80. I'm in the far left lane, and the vehicle in front of me directly in, it was the next lane over. It was I was in the center lane, and it was to the next lane to the right. He was in a 2-door little coupe. A tire blew at 75, 80 miles an hour, and his car starts spinning, and he bounces off the wall in front of me and then comes back to the middle of the road. And this is at 75, 80 miles an hour. And I'm on the brakes in this rental car, and I'm not scared of hitting him. I'm looking in my rearview mirror, who's going to hit me?
Right.
And I was able to get over into the median, or the little tiny 12-foot wide lane up against the wall, and the car that was behind me slammed into the car that was directly in front of this guy. And now I look to my right, and the car that lost control and hit the wall is in the center of the road. The thing smoked. The engine's, leaking all its fluids. It's completely crashed. And the driver slumped over. The airbags have deployed. And I've got to get to the airport. And I'm looking, and I leapfrog out to the center of the road, and I'm talking to him, and he's trying to start the car. I mean, it's toast. The whole front end's destroyed. His car was completely destroyed. I'm like, dude, you got to get out of this car. We got to get off the highway. You can't stay here. And I had to leave him. I'm thinking about it. I'm like, I'm going to die standing here. We're both going to get run over. And I'm looking, and I called the cops. People have heard me say this. They're like, you left him? I'm like, I got a family. And like in that moment of time, like the cars 80 miles an hour are on the horn, like a movie.
Yeah.
I'm like, screw this, man. And I'm like, dude, you got to get the out of this car. And I called and told him where he was. But I did not have any tools, meaning not even medical equipment. I had no flashing lights. I had no cones. I had nobody to wave at cars.
No tools,
Yeah, there was nothing I could do to change anything unless I tried to physically drag this dude, and it was like enough for me not to get run over. I'm like, you know what? He's probably better staying inside of that car, and I'm better getting the frick off this road like immediately. But my point was, everything was cool, man. I remember I was like in that split second, I was listening to a song. I was like, all right, I got plenty of time to get to the airport, drop this car off, find a sandwich or something at the airport, and then, just something.
Yeah.
And I noticed when I went up to his car, his rear tires, like I just remember looking like, what's going on with this car? Not like I was doing an inspection. They were bald as shit. So it was like, this asshole has, he might be broke, whatever. Don't be driving 80 miles an hour then, drive at 50. And like his poor decision to not maintain his stuff could have killed a bunch of people.
Absolutely.
I mean, it was like just pure luck that nobody got killed because it was rush hour traffic, like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the greater Phoenix area. But anyway, I think we get... we buy the thing and then we think we're good.
Yeah.
I get the CPR card in my wallet. I'm good for 2 years. Once 2 years is up, I'm not allowed to do CPR. Like, well, that's dumb.
People do that with guns.
Right.
I'm seeing that all the time. They'll buy a gun and think that it's the solution to a problem, but there's no follow-up. Yeah.
Yeah, or just like a home gym equipment or any of it. Like, it doesn't do anything if you don't use the stuff and apply the stuff. And law enforcement, fire, everybody's guilty of complacency, but that story with your friend, I mean, people think, oh, well, I'm not on a tactical team like that. People get holes punched through them all the time.
Yeah, look how many shootings happen just last week alone in all of our different major cities.
Or just somebody falling and impaling themselves on something. I saw a guy fall and impale himself on a concrete stake on a job site. His foot got stuck in something and he tripped in a metal concrete stake. They're like 5/8 steel, punched a hole through him.
We had, right after this tourniquet thing, like you mentioned, there was a lot of awareness that happened in all the different police departments. Things get publicized, and 2 days after tourniquets were issued, one of our patrol cops was at an intersection, lunchtime, and there was like a painter truck, like a painting crew. They kind of waved him over, and he was afraid at first it was some sort of an aggressive thing, but he realized the guy had cut himself on a pane of glass, and he was bleeding out. And so the officer, he came to the officer's car. So he went from, is this an ambush, to seeing this guy's hemorrhaging from his arm. So he put a tourniquet on him, saved his life. He had the tourniquet for 2 days.
That's cool.
So who knows how many people, have been out there needing those and didn't have the equipment. And I know of 2 or 3 other street cops that have put tourniquets. That's becoming sort of commonplace now, which is incredible.
And there's still so much misinformation, not to spend your time here talking about tourniquets, but American Heart Association just updated the CPR program, and because for years it was, okay, this person's not breathing, they could be bleeding to death, and your job as a first responder was to start pumping on their chest. They just augmented the material stating if there's a major bleed to, this is what the verbiage states, apply, and I'm sorry, American Heart Association, they made the change but then didn't provide any details. It says apply a commercially available tourniquet device or some other type of pressure dressing. Like so now they've got this caveat in there for the reader, but like if you go to any company in the world that pays CPR people to come in and teach like us, the person's going to be like, well, what's that thing? And so now you need this other training, which is cool, but there's so much misinformation. People still think, well, if you put that on there, I'm going to lose my arm,
Right.
or I'm going to lose my leg. Well, even if that is the case, you're not dead. You're not dead. Yeah, you're still here.
Well, that's a big deal. Like, for example, the S12. Can I do a little commercial for a second for you?
Sure, if you want to.
I don't mean to, but it's going to sound like one. Mr. Turley and I signed up, traveled across several states to come to S12 because two main reasons. I have to stay current and relevant so I can be credible, so I can provide a service to those families in Arizona. So that's one thing. The other thing was the D-Day response, the TCCC training. And I realize now in law enforcement, we don't realize how expensive that training and how valuable that is till you get out into this world. And when you're paying for it yourself to go.
Sure.
But I wouldn't let a 2-year period go by without that training. And that was her first shot at the training. So that's a way of life for us. That's just the price of admission. I would suggest everybody get that type of training because
I agree.
That's such an important, and I'm by no means a medic, but I just know that we were a product of our training and we just went on autopilot and didn't think of it that day. And apparently it had a pretty cool result. We went to a party for him when he started to become on the mend, when they knew he was going to be okay. And we got to see in his backyard all of his children and his mother and father. And that was moving, man.
It's pretty powerful when you think about a $20 piece of sticky plastic. I mean, you could have done it with something else, but you guys knew how to use it, put it on with haste, and then got him out of there to a higher level of treatment. Whereas if you were like, oh shit, man, stay with us, and just sat there rubbing him and holding his hand, he'd have gone
with all your good intentions.
He'd have been dead.
But just like you said, we didn't think. We just thought, okay, tourniquet, locate the wound, apply pressure, get the bleeding stopped, get to next higher medical. We might take that for granted in training. We're like, okay, for the quiz or the test. Okay, I got it. That's why in training, from now on, I'll always be the first one up in there learning, because it definitely pays off.
100%. What other things would you pass on to folks listening after 3 decades in law enforcement and chasing bad guys? What other things would you pass on? Something that came to mind for you talking about one of the reasons that you guys would win would be your aggressiveness. Like, how does that apply to a single mom walking across the proverbial dark parking lot? How does that same mindset or immediacy to act apply to Drew or I? It's because it is the same thing can apply.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. 2 points I can make on that. I try to make them as simple as I can. The first one is, we always, and this has been said by many folks with more experience than me, but I would say, like, to our female clients or young people, take a second to just look up long enough to mentally say, I see you. 9 times out of 10, that will diffuse any sort of ill intent. I know when I was on surveillance, if I'm watching you and you go out on foot and you turn, and you may be on the phone, not even thinking about me, but if you turn and make that eye contact, I'm scrambling, because now I think he's made me, we're burned, blah, blah, blah. We tease young detectives learning, because if a guy sneezes, they think we're burned, everybody go home. Well, let it play out. So that eye contact and a heads up posture, don't be on your device, that's enough to diffuse or deflect most situations. And then the other thing I can tell you, just to give you some kind of like data feedback, in my career, 30 years time, I personally saw probably 6 incidents of a woman going for a jog from the lowest neighborhoods to the most expensive. The age of the women was all different, but they would be attacked by a guy, and they would be attacked by one guy. Sometimes he was an older man, sometimes he was a teenager. But the bottom line on all those crime scenes is the female never won. She didn't take him out in hand-to-hand combat. She didn't overwhelm him. She wasn't able to run away even. And a couple of these women were like triathletes that were training. So they didn't win in those hand-to-hand confrontations when their life depended on it. Sometimes they had music on and they let someone get in their personal space. But that, to me, you can probably decide how to explain that more scientifically, but that was just a constant thing I saw in about 6 different murder scenes. Is the guy didn't stop. They did not survive the encounter. The guy surprised them. There's some data points to be taken out of there, and their hand-to-hand skills alone weren't enough. Now, maybe if they had a blade or they could reach a rock or something. But so I always tell my female clients that, and the young kids too, if someone's within that personal space of yours and they don't have your permission, you should already be ready to go.
I say righteously violent. Like
I agree with that.
Vicious and ruthless. We just found out, my coach Dan Hurt was just informed, so we go to Costa Rica, and there's an academy there. Our friend Ron Jarman and his wife run, it's called Hero Academy. And not a lot of economic options for people in this part of the world. Very poor, beautiful, but poor. So a lot of these kids, besides like soccer in the street or school when there is school, there's nothing. There's a lot of alcoholism, a lot of abuse. So they created this jiu-jitsu academy where these kids come for free and they get trained in jiu-jitsu. And it's not just like so that they can protect themselves. It's the love and support of adults that are not abusing them. It's positive mentors and relationships. And one of the girls, I believe she was 11 years old, her stepfather came home drunk the other night to rape her. She beat his ass and apparently like really hurt him. I don't know what the context of the fight was, but unfortunately an 11-year-old girl had to do that. But like there is a way for that to work. If somebody's like, we've got a girl at our gym, Kasha, who's a small little woman. If you saw her, you'd be like, yeah, whatever. This chick could just her viciousness would destroy most men because she knows how to fight and spent a lifetime doing it. But that thing that you just talked about, I think so many women and men, we by the time you should be fighting, it's bred into us. You just mentioned it, try to avoid, that we never have developed like a mental set point of at what point do I stop avoiding and start smashing rocks into people's heads. And that's different for everybody.
And it seems like, and we have I tell my folks, concealed carry clients, the first thing I do is scare them every way I can think of to not use a firearm because it's usually the last resort. And I feel like I can say that because I worked a high-risk assignment where we confronted people every day. So many times we're at a doorway or a threshold where we're giving commands to a bad guy. And we understand that action is faster than reaction. But I'm just going to be honest for a second. Many times we allow people to reach. No, but people may not. This may be controversial because, action's faster than reaction. But I'm just going to speak candidly. We gave people a lot of chances. So I didn't necessarily get rattled too much if I'm covering you with the gun and all of a sudden you reach for your phone. For example, we had a guy on a balcony of a high-end hotel that we'd been chasing, and the perimeter guy had him covered. He was 2 floors up, and he reached. So it was awkward because one shot was fired. My teammate missed him, and then he's like, bro, I was just calling my mom. He picked that moment to make a phone call. So what went from a lethal encounter automatically de-escalated, and guys had to climb up and actually physically take him into custody. But that's what I mean is that, was it wrong to shoot when he's reaching? Absolutely not. That's that furtive movement you hear about. In our job, we had plenty of backup. I just felt there were many times we'd wait and someone would reach. Very rarely did they ever reach for a gun, is my point. So I learned to give people ample opportunity. Now that could be a comfort level. You guys that are proficient at combatives, you might say, well, I'll let Dave do this. He's learning. You let me go a little farther because of your training. Does that make sense?
I think so. And I think also as we age, I mean, shit, even if you just we've all blown our back out.
Yeah.
I could be deadlifting hundreds of pounds on Tuesday and by Thursday blown a muscle out and be barely able to turn to look around the room. So what I'm capable of on Tuesday by the end of the week, and I feel great, so stay away from me. You might be having a completely different set of circumstances.
Yeah. So what I mean by that story is that I can
fly.
say that gun, yeah, he's all over. He's huge too. I don't know what you're feeding him.
That's a
high
big
protein
fly.
or something. But I feel like I can tell people this, that the gun's not always the answer.
Yeah.
Be careful. The old rules apply. Like, even if you think you have to go to a gun, what about your backdrop? Just think about the accountability. Because not my clients so much, but I get the feeling a lot of people want to obtain a little bit of training with the gun, and then they just can't wait for that gun to be the answer.
Dude, I say that all the time. When do I get to use this?
Yeah.
And it's almost like a get, like I want a story to tell, or I want to be able to vet my, not the same context, but I have a friend that's a kind of a famous soldier that came from a high level unit. There's a book written about him, and he told me one time over drinks, I asked him if he'd change anything in his life. Like, this guy did a lot of fighting, and he said every young man wants to drink from the cup of war until they taste it, and then you can't spit it out. Like, it's there, the flavor's in your mouth, and people want to do that, and then you go talk. I've interviewed a handful of guys on here that had justified shootings. Several of them, they didn't shoot until they were shot themselves by some type of ambush. And so, like, that's shitty. But then there's a couple people where it's a little iffy.
Yeah.
And their life is destroyed by lawyers and
That's
cops.
good. Well said, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, man, going back, what would you have done different? Like, you wanted to... I just listened to the whole Michael Draka. I went through all of the interviews. He was that dude in Florida that shot the unarmed black man that was maybe like in his 30s. He went up, he approached the car where the victim's girlfriend had parked in a handicap spot.
Oh, yeah, I'm familiar with that one.
The guy was just looking to use his gun.
Yeah.
And you look at all the, I read the case and followed it, but I never had seen all of the interviews from the detectives. And you just watch his body language, like he wanted to let the detectives know, like, I'm like you, I'm out here doing the Lord's work. And like he said things like, that's my store. I'm like, meaning like I'm here every day, it's my store. I keep an eye on the people coming and going. I was looking out for the store, like just looking for a reason to get to shoot somebody.
One of the things I tell folks is, we're teaching you about self-defense, not stuff defense. And it's self-defense, it's not stuff defense. You can't shoot someone over a beautiful pickup or a stereo or
why can't I? It's America.
Right. People don't like to hear that.
Yeah, it's America.
So, for example, in Arizona, we make it very clear we don't have a castle law, but I like it. At this stage of life, I'm all about trying to find simpler, more effective ways to communicate concepts or ideas.
Sure. You want to teach tomorrow at the instructor class? Because that's...
So we talk about workspace, for example.
Sure.
And you're good at this, but what is workspace? We can't just throw that verbiage.
Sure.
Dude, bro, get it up in your workspace. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Now,
Especially to somebody
that's... a mayo jar, where I've got to bring it up.
That stuff all squeeze bottle now these days,
right,
man.
right.
What
Flip the cap.
decade are you in? Do they
Mason
still
jar.
even sell mayonnaise
We
in a
drink our
jar?
moonshine out of jars in Arizona, yeah.
Do you?
But yeah, so I try to tell folks that don't be ready so fast to use that gun. And I point at guns at a lot of people, and rarely, unless they totally just, pick up a weapon and they're firing. And like I said, the last two incidents we had, they fired at us. This is why I might be a good point to add. We had our last shooting was on a busy street in the south side of town, predominantly sort of a minority area. A young man is dead on the curb, and our detectives are all around. It's 4:00 in the afternoon, rush hour. But as soon as the shots stopped, our guys worked him immediately. Not because of optics, because it's the right thing to do. You train yourself to get into the proper mindset. Regardless of what he did 10 seconds ago, he's now a gunshot victim, and he needs aid until someone else can arrive. So our guys worked him, and we never received complaints, allegations. We were doing the taxpayers' work. We were doing the Lord's work, and we were just very open. You've asked us to come do this, to deliver these packages, so to speak. We're doing what you folks want us to do. We're doing it pretty much how you'd want. And honestly, we didn't have too many problems with people as far as the whole hateful things going on now. That was only up to 2 years ago. Now, granted, we were a special unit that...
Any of you or your friends come over here, you're not going to like how it goes. Stay away from me.
So, if I'm a young cop, shouldn't I know that about every place?
Joking, relax.
Yeah. But that's just the kind of paranoid mindset they live in. But all folks, going back to what we talk about with our clients, have more of a plan than just to grab that pistol you've shot one time. Hopefully have a plan where that doesn't come into play. Because it's not pretty. All of the trainers can never state that enough. The aftermath of that is not pretty.
I think there's another interesting thing, like maybe a little deeper nuance that it becomes like a attitude, mindset kind of a thing. Like, I don't want to be scared to use my gun. I just have to have clearly defined parameters on when I can or should. And just like I was just put a post up on CPR today because we were just working on it, and a study I read says 70 to 90% of polled Americans said they wouldn't apply or do CPR to somebody if they watched them go into cardiac arrest, was like the whole question. And the reason that they said that they wouldn't is because they're unsure of their skills or that it had been a while since they'd been trained. And even though they had been trained, and it's such a simple, silly thing when you think about it, unlike drawing a gun and shooting somebody, it's also simple. It's like folks have the thing, but then we also don't want to be scared. If I need it, I need it. Right? I don't want to be scared to change my tire. If I have to change my tire, I need to be able to jack my truck up and change the tire. I just want to not use it for the wrong reasons.
So,
Or at the wrong time.
Before we started this road trip over here, we actually used our new bed cover and our new tool tray, but we put our big jack in, and we actually went through a dry run. Just basic things. This new truck of mine, does it have locking lugs like the old one or no?
No.
And do I want to go for that factory jack, which you need?
No.
It's like a Lego starter set, right? So Mr. Turley and I get out and do a dry run of it, so we know if it happens on the side of the road. Here's your his and hers reflective vest from the dollar store. Here we go, and this is what we'll do. So we can at least try to plan for some of those.
But smart.
One thing that we teach in our classes, I learned from DOJ, that post-shooting, sometimes may not be able to go into too much detail here, but one thing I've learned from being at work is have a post-shooting protocol. And you missed him.
I missed him.
You probably knocked the hell out of yourself, right?
No, I didn't. I'm not concerned with that. I didn't want to hit that guy's.
He's going to knock somebody out. But have some sort of post-shooting procedure in mind. We don't think about that a lot. So the first time I received a call from someone that said, hey, remember, this is our agency protocol. We were like, come on, don't make us go get checked out at urgent care. We're the US Marshals task force. Don't make us go. But we've learned that that just makes common sense to have some sort of a plan, even if it's well, I think you mentioned it before. You've gotten calls. One time, one was in progress. 3 times. Yeah, so I need Mick on the phone. Have a network, guys. Have a network, whether it's your neighborhood cop.
CCW safe.
Hey, I'm a believer.
Yeah.
And some of my guys are already signing up. That made me proud. But how can you not, right? Even if it's just a simple protocol of, okay, start our network, start notifying people. The CCW safe that we didn't sign up because the pamphlet's still on our desk. Start calling people and be polite, but say, hey, I've got a detective. I've got to take care of my well-being. By all means, let's take care of this other person, and I'll be with you in a little bit.
I think we did a video, Drew, didn't we, on post-action response? I think it's one of our must-have skills videos. Make sure you're safe. Is there any other bad guys?
Yep.
Notify the police. Let them know who you are, where you're at, what you look like.
Exactly.
Identify any witnesses that are on scene. That's not what this podcast is about, but yeah, I think that's another one of those things. Like, I'll just sort that out then. Why would I do that?
Yeah, you won't. You'll say things that will get you, that you'll regret. Because even those of us that want to be helpful, we've learned, hey, just don't be quite so helpful. Take it easy for a little bit. Take an hour.
Everything you say to the police can be used against you. None of it can be used to protect you.
Right. And so here's what I tell folks. I don't know if they realize, at least in Arizona, I realize states are different. If you boil this whole shooting or not shooting thing down to its simplest form, it's the same rules that apply, whether you're a Navy SEAL, FBI, US Marshals, or a private citizen. You have to have that imminent fear, right? We all know this, of serious bodily harm or death. It doesn't matter where you are, home or not. We don't want to obsess over some castle doctrine. I would tell people, even if, like Florida, the Zimmerman case, even if you had a right to go outside your threshold and do something, why would you? Nothing out there is worth your time and your treasure.
There is like a philosophical discussion, especially happening now as so many young people are armed, young men, 20, 30s, 40s, a lot of you guys, and they say, but it's my duty as a citizen to protect my neighborhood, to protect my home, and why, if we don't stand up to evil, who will? And there is some truth to that dialogue, but I really wish I just had stayed in bed last night and not been on the news for 3 years. Yeah,
and it's okay I try to make my folks very much aware of the cost that's involved. You might have to go stay somewhere for a while. Forget about your job. What about your kids or your spouse at school? If you're in something even the least bit controversial, you're going to have journalists at your door within 30 minutes. They're going to look you up and find out where you're at, and they call it an ambush interview. They're going to hit your kids up, your spouse. A lot of things to think about. Yeah. And what I tell folks is it's the same as first responders. There's not a secret rule. Most folks believe that law enforcement has some additional standards or freedoms. They haven't been able to shoot a fleeing felon since the mid-60s. That laws went away. It's the same rule for everyone, guys, regardless of who you are. If you're in a spot where you can lawfully be, then it's the same rule for everyone. But in law enforcement, we are given a legal rep. We're given a union rep, a peer rep, and we take advantage of that system that's in place for us. So why wouldn't private citizens do the same?
I think a good thing for people to do, especially if they've got a friend that's a copper, just say, hey, what's the protocols at your department? What do you guys do post violent engagement? And what guys like Ayub talked about for years is it's okay if you tell a policeman, I'm fully intending to give you a complete account of what happened, but right now I'm in shock and in fear for my life, and or was in fear for my life, and I'd like to take a minute to compose myself and get legal counsel. You would understand that because that's the same thing that your union rep will tell you to do.
And science has improved. We've gained a lot of knowledge. Detectives understand, unlike 10, 20 years ago, that if you're sent home after a shooting and all of a sudden you're thinking, you know what, there was a girl across the street in a gray hoodie. She would be a witness, blah, blah, blah. You didn't lie or hide that. These things, detectives, law enforcement, the courts, they're understanding this is a normal process. So it's okay to make an appointment for Wednesday to come in and talk and say, hey, I thought about this.
You know what's interesting? I'd like to read after actions of police-involved shootings, and you look at what maybe the defending officer or whoever, it doesn't even need to be a cop, what the defender told the detectives or interviewers, and then what maybe was captured on video, or what was what there was 3 or 4 eyewitness accounts of somebody that wasn't a combatant saw, and it's different a lot of times, and it's like, he turned to the right. Well, no, he turned to the left. Or it was 5 minutes. No, it was 10 seconds. Or he had one of the ones I just was reading about was the active shooter event that happened in Southern California in 2018 at the Country Western nightclub. And the man wasn't lying. He just perceived and recognized things differently than how they actually happened. And so then a prosecutor could look and say, this guy's lying. I mean, the camera right there shows that the bad guy had a green shirt on, but he said he had a red shirt on. I don't frickin' know why I thought it was green or red, that's just what I remember. And people don't get that they say that stuff, and cop writes it down, and then later you realize it's green because you saw some footage too. And wait, first it was red, now it's green. You know, what do you know?
Yeah, those things can be blown up when you see that in writing. In a transcript, it's a little scary, but the smallest statement made on scene on a Monday afternoon right after an incident, and then you come in Thursday and they ask you, what about the guy with the green shirt? I don't remember. Oh, so you're omitting something.
Yeah.
So now you've got two official records, and that can be directly used against you.
Dude, my wife told me something. We got to go to Montana, and I had asked her about the rental car, and I asked her again today. I go, hey, did you get that situated? And she's like, don't you remember me just telling you yesterday that we got to pick it up from this place? And I'm like,
yeah.
That was just yesterday.
Of course I remember. I was quizzing you and you passed.
Yeah, but I mean,
Good job.
And there's no stress involved with that. There's no duress. There's no violence going on, and
You've called it before. I've heard you describe it as bandwidth. Can I use that?
Sure.
Because it's true. You only have so much, bandwidth that you can support, and so I like to take that angle of explaining to folks that we're not different than law enforcement. We're private citizens. The law, everything is structured the same way. The only difference is law enforcement has a little bit of training, and they make an effort to stay abreast of what's going on, where most of us private citizens, let's be honest, folks couldn't even tell you about constitutional law or which amendment covers, search and seizure or self-incrimination.
I touched him that time.
I saw, but he's still flying.
He hit me right here.
So they don't, people don't put in the effort ahead of time. And that's one of those most basic things. So, that's one of the things I like to explain is there's not secret laws or additional laws, but everybody should have some type of a post-shooting protocol or plan that they're going to work off of. Because that's important.
I like that. If the folks that have been listening, watching, checking us out, want to get a hold of you, how would they do that? Because there's plenty of people all over the valley there that need training.
Cool. So you can find us on TACSafeAZ.com.
TAC,
SAFEAZ.com. All one word, .com. Our website's on there, or you can email us at TACSafeAZ.
You're on Instagram.
Instagram and Facebook.
YouTube.
We're starting to make our debut in YouTube. Yeah, cool. I told you we made our first couple of videos, and a monsoon hit in the middle of our taping. And
that's cool.
Yeah, nothing like live TV, right?
I think that's exciting stuff that you're getting to pass that stuff on. It's not TV either, it's YouTube, but whatever. Yeah, I mean, you elevated yourself to TV status, Dave. So the folks listening...
This isn't the Jay Leno show?
No.
Oh, I was misled. No.
I've got one car, not a building full of them. And yeah. Now, the people listening, what would you leave them with if you never saw them again, never passed their way, if they never ran into you? What would you want them to remember that Dave Turley had to say?
Well, I guess be kind to each other. Be patient. And I mean that. I'm not just saying that. I'm not, I come from a job where, like I said, we were in a high-risk environment, a lot of violence. I'm all about the love. The folks that know us in Arizona can tell you, just show love to people, and be kind. Be a warrior, but be a thoughtful warrior.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. You were kind. You showed up. I brought this down here, and you brought me a bottle of Knob Creek that you had laser etched with our logo and some verbiage that I don't need to share because it's for me, but I thought that's pretty cool. That was kind of you.
That's cool.
Isn't it?
Maybe we'll do shots, right?
No, you're not drinking my booze. Thank you. Hey, I appreciate that you spent the time to come out here. I'm looking forward to the next 3 days of training. Everybody that comes in signs the board. It's
cool.
It's the 29th of August, so throw the date on there, throw your name. We can just push that chair aside when you stand up.
You really had Clint Eastwood?
Yep, Clint Eastwood was here. There was
Beyonce?
President Kennedy was on there.
Awesome.
Now, for you guys, as he's signing, this podcast was brought to you by Gunfighter Gun Oil as well as CCW Safe on the CarryTrainer website. there are discount codes for literally dozens of companies, and most of them extend that discount to you guys as a favor to us. Gunfighter Gun Oil, best lube and firearm cleaning products on the planet. CCW Safe, this is what we use to protect ourselves, and not the bottle, but the name. There's a discount code for them as well, which is CarryTrainer. Check that out. Hey, if you dug this podcast, leave a comment, talk about it, share it. Let Drew know how much you appreciate him. And, you know, you guys, I got to get on the other side of the camera to show you his triceps. He's been lifting weights like crazy. It looks like two huge bratwursts wrapped around the back of his arm. They're amazing. Be well, don't be dickheads. Check out Dave and his wife down in Arizona if you're there. It's good training. He knows what's up. Bye now. Visit our website, CarryTrainer.com, for information about classes held throughout the U.S., CarryTrainer apparel, and upcoming projects. You can also email us at training@CarryTrainer.com for information about setting up your own private course or speaking engagement. Training@CarryTrainer.com or CarryTrainer.com. Hey, little brother, what do you think of Gunfighter Gun Oil?
I'm gonna have to show you.
Hey, Steve, what do you think of Gunfighter Gun Oil?
Well, Mick,
Hey, Steve, what do you think of Gunfighter Gun Oil?
well, Mick, I have to show you about that. Gunfighter lube. Baby, I had the gunfighter blues. But then I got me some gunfighter lube. Let me tell you about it. Made in the USA. Amazing lubricity. Amazing adhesion, baby. 100% synthetic. But it's gonna last you. Gunfighter gun oil, baby. Took away my gunfighter blues. I'm still working on it, but you know.
So you like the lube?
It's the best.